One of the weirdest titles I've taken a surprising amount of interest in is a very niche survival horror title for the Nintendo DS, Nanashi no Game, also known as The Nameless Game. A video game about a haunted video game, and if you think that's weird, you haven't seen anything yet. This game and most of the follow-up titles have never seen localization, because apparently the focus groups didn't like the idea of a first-person game with no guns. Go figure. Nanashi no Game stands out by being one of the few DS games I know of to use book orientation. That is, the player holds the DS on its side, with the control pad being used to move and the stylus and touchscreen being used to turn and interact with the environment. The two screens show what you see with each of your two eyes, the top screen being the left eye and the bottom screen being the right eye, though I tend to treat the bottom screen like it's the only screen and center my vision on whatever appears in it. Of course, if you're emulating this, you're going to get rather annoyed because the orientation switches whenever the player has to interact with the eponymous haunted video game, meaning if you've rotated the emulator window, you have to flip it around fairly often. Recording for this video is a pain too. Now I have to have two entire layouts in OBS. Anyway, the game within the game can give you clues and additional story info if you search through it. Now, after about an hour, you might get the idea that the game is nothing but walking around and interacting with objects, and I don't blame you. The haunted game only lets you play it at the appropriate time in the story. Trying to open it at any other time just shows you the same static picture. The game itself is basically an RPG with no monsters or combat, and the story progresses when you talk to the right people at the right time. There are secret items to find that unlock a true ending that alters about 2 lines of text. Outside the haunted game, you do run into dangerous situations in the form of zombies that you absolutely must not touch, or you die. Your game console can actually detect them somewhat, as you'll hear a crackling noise as you get close to one. Careful not to open any doors if you hear that noise, something might be behind it. These don't exactly pose too much of a threat though, since if one of the zombies starts chasing you, you're basically okay as long as you remember which direction doesn't lead to a dead end. That said, even if the gameplay elements are very spare, it's actually something of a fascinating gem. Square Enix developed it, which explains why the haunted game resembles the early Final Fantasy titles, and its Dragon Quest-inspired theme music actually got rearranged for Final Fantasy XIV's soundtrack. Also, this game came out in 2008, meaning that the concept of a haunted video game actually predates the famous horror story Ben Drowned, and the spooky gaming craze that followed, though both of these are also definitely inspired by the Ring movies. The story, which I'm now going to totally spoil, is somewhat interesting as well. The cursed video game spreads to game consoles through a street pass-like function of the TS, or twin screen, which is definitely not related to any portable Nintendo devices in any way. Rumor has it that if you don't beat the game in 7 days, you will die, and a fellow student has been missing for that exact amount of time. So the player investigates and finds that the student, Odaka, seems to have drowned right there in his room. Checking out his TS, we see that he encountered a scene in which villagers are drowning a doll that also happens to be named Odaka. After Odaka's girlfriend also succumbs to the curse, the school professor, Oyama, tasks the player with investigating the source of the curse. To do that, he tracks the game downloads to an abandoned hospital, which is where we encounter the zombies I mentioned. It turns out that anyone who dies to the curse becomes trapped in the game world, and their bodies essentially become slaves to the cursed game. At the hospital, the player finds the medical record of a man named Yutani, who died under similar circumstances to Odaka. Yutani was the president of a game company working on an unnamed video game project, the staff of which have all either gone missing or died. The player then investigates their former office, which has more zombies and documents related to the game they were working on. It turns out that only one member of the game's staff is still alive, the director, Ushio Ikuta. By the way, I'm probably messing up these pronunciations, so I hope that's not an issue. The player then travels to the Ikuta residence to find the man himself curled up in the closet, nearly catatonic. Upon finding him, the cursed game starts up a cutscene that resembles a flashback to past events. Under severe work stress, Yutani broke into Ushio's house and killed his wife. Ushio's daughter, Asahi, sees her mother dead and flees. This all took place while Ushio was working at the office 24/7. His company was very close to going under, and they had to get their game out as soon as possible, meaning Ushio had no time to even see Asahi at all. This led the girl to hate video games, seeing them as the cause for all this tragedy. It's rather ironic and sad at the same time, because Ushio worked so hard on the game specifically so that he could show Asahi the way video games can be as beautiful as classical works of art. You almost wonder if the writer was making some kind of commentary. Heck, Ushio's company being on the ropes is reminiscent of the situation Squaresoft was in while they were making the first Final Fantasy. After fleeing her home, Asahi jumped off the roof of a hotel and drowned in the ocean. Okay, why is every death in the horror genre a drowning? Seriously. Anyway, with Asahi's death, the curse began, and Asahi has been offing anyone with a TS after 7 days. After learning all of this, however, the player brings Ushio to the bench near the lighthouse overlooking the ocean, which was Asahi's favorite place. The ghost of Asahi reconciles with her father at last. The curse is broken, and if the player collected all the hidden items, they get a final email from Asahi that just says thank you. Aww. Nanashi no Game is a charming little adventure, a bit basic, maybe lacking in content since it finishes rather easily in 3 hours and the player doesn't really interact with a lot, but the idea of the story is humble enough. Of course, a sequel could always build on the ideas presented, and that's what the next game, Nanashi no Game May, tries to do. Whether it succeeds or not is debatable. Nanashi no Game May, or the nameless game, The Eye, takes a number of steps to address some of the issues I presented with regard to the gameplay. More puzzles involving the cursed game are present in each map. You're able to choose between multiple paths through the story, there are now collectibles, and the cursed game takes on a new form as well. Thing is, this is all unfortunately set to a story that rehashes ideas from the first game while introducing confusing new elements. The story of the sequel starts out the same way the first game did, with the player receiving the cursed game. The very same cursed game with the same music and first town. The player can enter the names of themselves and their 2 friends, but the latter have default names, so I'll go with that. Ren is the player's girlfriend, which their male friend, Yuto, gets so jealous of that he sends the cursed game to the player out of spite. The next day, Yuto turns up dead in a manner similar to Odaka. The curse is still alive. Ren and the player tell their professor, Kawagoe, about the mysterious death, and Kawagoe believes them, as he'd heard about the cursed game from Oyama before he too was cursed and died. Kawagoe sends the player to Odaka's old house, where they find his TS with the cursed game still on it. Upon playing, the player follows instructions from a strange email and inputs a command that causes a woman to burst from the TS and pull his left eye out. This is where the new mechanics come into play. The player's left eye has become cursed and can now see weird handprints on walls. These are only visible on the top screen since that's your left eye. Also, the top screen becomes scrambled when zombies are nearby. Those are back too naturally, and some are only visible through the top screen or just invisible entirely. Interacting with the ghostly handprints causes the cursed game to gain a new function for solving a puzzle. This isn't really put to good use in my opinion, and the reason for it is that the game relies entirely on you finding those weird handprints. For example, on your way to Oyama's house, you encounter many zombies in fixed locations. What you're meant to do is find the white handprint on the wall, touch it, then the cursed game will show you a map that resembles the real world with NPCs where the zombies are. Getting them to move away in the game will move them away in the real world too. So you encounter a zombie, touch a white handprint, and then repeat that process several more times. You can open the game and explore the area on your own, but you can't move any zombies without the white handprint. So again, there's really no reason for you to even be able to open the cursed game manually. It's still more or less only done when you are prompted to do so. Only this time the prompts are the white handprints themselves. At 3 points in the story, you can choose one of 2 locations to investigate. You don't really learn anything different from the different locations, but having some variance in how you get to the game's conclusion helps the replay value. Hidden items that affect the ending are hidden in the different paths, so you do need to use New Game Plus to find them all. You can also find collectibles in the form of the cursed cartridges, some of which are seriously hard to find in the game worlds. What are these cartridges for? Well, in addition to white handprints, sometimes you're locked into rooms or infinitely looping hallways, and are tasked with finding a red handprint instead. Touching this downloads a platformer level that you must complete to move on with the story. The platformer levels are reminiscent of rage-inducing platformers like I Wanna Be the Guy, Super Meat Boy, or ROM hacks like Kaizo Mario World. Luckily you have infinite lives, and the levels encountered in the story aren't super difficult, but the cursed cartridges you can find add more optional stages for you to play, and those can get downright nasty. There's really not a lot going on with the platformer levels, but they must have been seriously popular because DSiWare received not one, but 2 downloadable compilations of all the platformer levels. These are entitled Noroi no Game Chi and Noroi no Game Goku, respectively Cursed Game of Blood and Cursed Game of Prison. If you combine the words Chi and Goku, you also get the word Jigoku, which means hell. Nice! Mobile players also received a collection of these levels as well, entitled 774 Deaths, the idea there being that 774, if you pronounce the numbers as Japanese words, you get Nanashi, 774. Strangely, this mobile platformer was in fact localized to English, even though no other game in the Nanashi no Game series has ever been officially translated. What you've been seeing in my video is the excellent pair of fan translations for the DS games. Anyways, I'm getting sidetracked. After investigating Oyama's house, the player gets an email from the man himself, which is spooky considering he should be dead. The player can investigate either a hotel Oyama once stayed at or a karaoke club he was investigating. At either location, the player discovers Oyama's TS with the cursed game running it, and the player is able to download Oyama into his own TS. Yeah, you just download a victim of the cursed game into your own console. I have no idea how it works. Stuff like this and the various handprints are what I was talking about earlier with how they introduce new stuff haphazardly. I mean, stuff like downloading souls, ghostly handprints, and zombies you can only see out of your cursed left eye shouldn't be too out of place in a paranormal horror setting, but keep in mind that none of this came up in the original game. This is apparently the same cursed game as before, with the same music and everything else, so we already know the game's origins. The question is, what's up with this new ghost girl and her new powers? I wouldn't have this issue at all if it were an entirely different cursed game with its own development history. By the way, the event where you download Oyama into your TS occurs during a path split, so that technically means that Oyama's TS can be in 2 separate locations at the same time. You just happen to find it at whichever location you choose to investigate. It seems kind of a little strange after you think about it for a while. Speaking of the new ghost girl, our next lead is investigating a school. This part of the game actually got my attention because the cursed game interacts with the school in an interesting way. The game world matches up with the real world perfectly, and your character appears wherever you were when you opened the game. The zombies this time are invisible in the real world, but appear in the game world and move in exactly the same way. So by viewing them in the game world, you can view their movement patterns and do something to make them go away. Unfortunately, even though you can explore the game world by moving around in the real world, you still have to find those white handprints in order to even do anything with the zombies. So outside of finding hidden items, you still can't do much just opening the game manually without being prompted. And while I'm at it, why can you affect the zombies by doing stuff in the game world anyways? It's as if the cursed game has become some sort of communication tool for talking to ghosts, but the game never states this. So I can't really take that as the intention here. Anyway, while at the school, we do in fact encounter not one, but 2 ghost girls, one white and the other red. The red ghost has been hostile to the player, while the white ghost has actually been somewhat helpful and shows us a vision of 3 students from the school, Naoki, Kenta, and Akane. It seems they were cursed by the game, as they all suffered mysterious deaths. But wait a minute, we saw 2 ghost girls and the vision only shows 1 female student. What's going on here? For some reason, the player is now tasked with investigating the graveyard where the 2 boys were buried. I really don't know why. I guess the characters think going someplace tangentially related to the ghost will reveal something new. And I guess they were right, because you can investigate either boy's grave, and after solving some pretty tense puzzles to avoid getting zombified, a male ghost shows you a vision of his past. It turns out Naoki and Akane were friends since childhood. They met Kenta later, who hit it off with Akane very quickly, making Naoki jealous. Naoki became bitter towards Kenta. When the cursed game started spreading, Naoki tricked Kenta into playing it out of spite, not unlike what Yuto does to the player. When Kenta was inevitably killed by the cursed, Akane mistakenly thought Naoki had killed him, and then she fell down a flight of stairs, fatally wounding herself. Akane was hospitalized, which makes the hospital she's at our next destination, and whichever male ghost the player met tags along with them for the trip. Thing is, we don't know which hospital Akane is even at. No hospital in the country has a girl named Akane there. So, naturally, the characters decide to try an abandoned hospital instead, namely the same hospital Asahi was admitted to in the previous game. And you know what? They're right again. It just feels like a leap of logic, if you ask me. So, at the hospital, we see the two ghost girls appear to be working against one another, one helping you, the other impeding your progress. After several more red and white handprints, we finally find Akane's body lying right next to Ren's body. Oh yeah, did I mention Ren was attacked by zombies after contacting Ushio Ikuta? She's not technically dead though. It's complicated. Get ready for a lot of we made this stuff up as we went along, because it's here that Akane contacts the player and explains that the two ghost girls are both Akane. Her out-of-control hatred created the red ghost, and I guess the white ghost is the real Akane. Her soul has been split in half somehow after becoming angry at anyone involved with the game. Okay, let me stop for a moment. What does Akane have to do with the cursed game? Like, at all. It's not like the game was a factor in messing with her relationships. The game didn't keep her dad away from her or anything like what Asahi perceived. Part of what made the original Nanashi no game charming is that we can actually empathize with the ghost. Even though Asahi killed people, her hating games and cursing her father's creation was something I could understand her doing. With Akane, I don't see what one love triangle has to do with the cursed game. Naoki only made Kenta play it as a joke. He couldn't have known the game would actually kill anyone. I bring all this up because it's apparently what enabled Akane to become cursed in the first place, and splitting her soul in two is just something that's able to happen because maybe the writers thought a game of good ghost, bad ghost would be interesting. Again, it would make a lot more sense if the cursed game were an entirely new game, not just one from the previous story, because then you have a lot more room to do new stuff and have it make more sense. Also, apparently the game imprisoned Ren in a similar manner, leaving her body a living shell, because again, it can do that somehow. Oyama proposes that we sync our souls with Akane so that we can enter her mental world, and I cannot believe I just typed that, or said that rather. This all comes out of nowhere. I know this is a paranormal horror fantasy about a ghost that kills you with a cursed video game, but come on, give us some kind of foreshadowing or setup. Like, has Oyama does this before? How does he know the player's left eye will enable him to sync with Akane's soul? Or whatever. Are we playing I the Somnium Files or something? Better finish the game in 6 minutes, I guess. At least, the final area is somewhat interesting. It's a spooky-looking wheat field from Akane's childhood memory, and it introduces the gimmick of the red ghost randomly appearing and killing you if you don't react to her appearance quickly. Lovely. You need to sneak through 2 areas before you can enter the final area. In it, Oyama reveals that the cursed game is its own entity, and it was the cause of the soul splitting. Basically, anybody with an intense hatred can become a host of sorts for the cursed game to propagate itself. I guess. This is more of that classic Square Enix storytelling, isn't it? The kind we see in their modern games. So, Kenta and Naoki attempt to calm the red ghost, but the cursed game seizes control of her and starts trying to kill you. You now need to avoid her at all costs, which can be difficult because if you get too far away from her, she teleports in front of you, and you could easily ram into her. But if you move too slow, she catches you anyways. The solution? Constantly sidestep, because this keeps you moving away from her fast enough to not get caught, but slow enough to not trigger a teleport. And just in the nick of time, we get an email from Ushio Ikuta. Ren managed to contact him in time, somehow. I guess the zombie got her after they made contact. Why doesn't the cursed game kill Ushio too? Can it not do that for some reason? I know Asahi refused to kill her father, despite the animosity towards him, but she's not here now. Anyway, Ushio sends a game update to add an actual ending to the game, I guess, which fixes Akane's soul, I guess, and she reconciles with the two boys, releasing their spirits and ending the curse of the game. I guess. I don't get this, but fine. Thing is, Ren still won't wake up. On your first playthrough, you get a mysterious email here that only says, "Where is my body?" The body it refers to is the faceless effigy. Pieces of it can be found in the game worlds, and if you find them all on a New Game Plus run, a different email comes up. The cursed game is still active despite losing its host, and wants to talk to the player directly. You can refuse, in which case Ren never wakes up and life goes on. However, if you choose to take the game up on the offer, the game reveals that it's going to kill you next in order to make Ren hate the game and therefore be eligible to be its next host. Okay, deep breath. I'm totally okay with the curse being its own entity. I'm totally okay with it trapping the player like this because it was hinted at this could happen, but this just feels too nonsensical. Like, it just held onto Ren as a backup, and as soon as it kills you, that's enough for Ren to have enough hatred to become its new host. I just don't feel like they thought this all the way through. At any rate, that ends Nanashi no Game May, and wow, I really wrote a lot about the sequel. I guess I really feel like the potential for this game was squandered, though. There weren't a lot of Nanashi no Game sequels after this, either. There's the aforementioned platformer compilations, and only one actual sequel did eventually happen. Nanashi no App, or the Nameless App, for mobile platforms. This one takes place entirely inside the cursed game, which is now a cursed OS for your phone. There's no translation of this one, and it's probably completely lost content anyways. No APK download I've been able to find, no listing on app stores, and there's apparently an online component that no longer works, so you wouldn't be able to finish the game even then. Well, that's enough of me rambling about a random cult classic that I thought would be neat to talk about for Spooky Month. Hope I didn't drone on about it too much, or at least not as much as that blasted song that's going to be stuck in my head now does. I hope someday someone tries the haunted video game approach once again, because I do find the concept very interesting. Until next time, I'm Efrain225, and I really need to clean my ears out.